Japan's Prime Minister Ashiba is pissed at Donald Trump and the way Trump and his regime have disrespected and dishonored Japan. We previously reported on the MeidasTouch network how Prime Minister Ashiba's finance minister, Katsunobu Kato, had previously threatened that they would dump United States Treasury holdings. Japan is the largest holder of United States treasuries, over $1 trillion, that they would dump them, tanking the United States market if the United States persisted down this course. We previously reported how Japan's economy minister, Ryoshi Akazawa, who's the chief negotiator in dealing with Donald Trump's trade war against Japan and the world, has been saying that the Trump regime has been dealing in bad faith behind closed doors and to the international community. It's important that we follow these stories for this reason, even though lots of corporate news is not really focused on it, especially the cable news. You do get stories like this occasionally from Bloomberg, but it's important that we situate it in the right context. This is in the past 24 hours. Bloomberg reports Japan won't compromise its national interest in trade talks with the U.S. by fixating on time limits, Prime Minister Ashiba says, signaling Tokyo is not rushing to agreements. Now, it was 45 days ago or so, maybe more, where the Trump regime had been saying stuff like the following. People inside the Trump White House say they're nearing a deal with India, which can then be used as a template for a deal with Japan, South Korea, and Australia. This is what the Trump White House was saying to anybody who would listen. They were saying it to New York Post writers like Charles Gasparino. And we were saying here on the MeidasTouch network, that's not what India is saying. That's not what Prime Minister Ashiba's government is saying. That's not what they're saying in Australia. Trump is lying. But our corporate news in the United States bought that hook, line, and sinker, and they said, oh, reaching a deal with Japan, reaching a deal there, 90 deals in 90 days. The Trump regime has done 0 deals in 90 days. What they did with the United Kingdom was not a deal. The document, the memorandum of understanding, literally says this is not a binding deal, and all it would really do anyway is give preferential treatment to Land Rover, Rolls-Royce, and Jaguar over American manufacturers. The United States didn't do a deal with China. America capitulated. They took the 145% tariffs they imposed on China and made it 30% tariffs. So now Americans get taxed 30% more on goods coming from China. Let's take a look right here on what Japanese Prime Minister Ashiba is saying. We need to pay close attention to the Japanese bond markets as well, because as Japan's economy is getting more and more volatile as well, they're increasingly going to potentially use the nuclear option, which is to dump American bonds and try to get cash. You know, one of the issues, right, that has kept them afloat is that they hold all of these bonds. But as the American bond market becomes less and less reliable, this becomes an important issue for Japan. So Japan is saying through its Prime Minister Ashiba, it's not compromising its national interest in trade talks with the U.S. by fixating on time limits. Prime Minister Ashiba said that they're not going to rush into an agreement that harms the national interest of Japan. The nation won't simply be going down the same path after the UK, this is how Bloomberg reports it, it's inaccurate, became the first nation to reach a trade agreement with the Trump administration earlier this month, and China reached a temporary truce with the US, Ashiba said in Parliament on Monday. And again, China didn't reach anything. Donald Trump sent his lackeys to Switzerland who reduced tariffs to 145% to 30%. There's nothing else in there. There's not a deal. There's nothing else. There's no truce. It's a capitulation. That's how the rest of the world is seeing it. And the UK thing was not a deal. Quote, We will not follow other countries simply because they are moving forward, Ashiba said. Of course, we will keep time limits in mind during negotiations, but we have no intention of compromising our national interests by becoming overly fixated on them. The Prime Minister's comments suggest that Japan isn't seeking a quick deal, even as an across-the-board levy is scheduled to return. It's to an original 24% tariff in early July, up from the current 10%, quote, baseline rate. Ashiba has said Japan won't accept a deal that won't address a separate 25% tariff on cars, a key economic engine for the country. Donald Trump has also hit Japan and others with the same level of levies on aluminum and steel. And then earlier yesterday, when Donald Trump held a press conference, he was talking about raising those levies to even 100% during this disastrous press conference. Ashiba didn't specify what time limits he had in mind. Local media reporters say the country's top trade negotiator, Ryoshi Akazawa, is set to visit again the United States for a third round of talks. As the negotiations continue, the tariffs are expected to hit Japanese companies for longer. Japan's economy contracted in the first quarter, even before most of the extra U.S. tariffs were implemented. This next story coincides with this as well. Ashiba rebuffs tax cut demands with Greek debt comparison. Japan's Prime Minister Ashiba rebuffed calls for tax cuts, saying the nation's financial conditions are worse than Greece's. The premier said he disagrees with the idea of funding tax cut with Japanese government bonds, signaling caution over additional government spending when the nation's borrowing costs are rising. It's important to recognize the dangers of a society and a world with interest rates, Ashiba said in Parliament on Monday, indirectly referring to the Bank of Japan's continued moves to raise interest rates since it abandoned its negative rate policy last year. The government is not in a position to comment on interest rates, but the reality is we're facing a world with them. Our country's fiscal situation is undoubtedly extremely poor, worse than Greece's. Now, why is he saying that as well? I think he's also letting the United States know, subtly, the nuclear option is on the table. If you're grinding us into the ground, Prime Minister Ashiba still has a little while to go before I think that he believes his government is vulnerable to being toppled by the opposition party, which wants to have even a stronger hard line against Trump's extortion tactics. I think that message is for the United States, with Ashiba saying, you're going to force us to dump our holdings of United States treasuries. Is that where you want us to go? Hint, hint. Remember what happened to Greece? Now imagine that happens to us with the United States if Japan essentially goes bankrupt. So no wonder a new poll has just come out that says 81% of Japanese people feel uneasy about Trump's second poll from Tokyo. 81% of people in Japan feel more easy than hopeful about Donald Trump. And people were starting this term out actually feeling hopeful. Describing why they felt uneasy, people cited the tariffs and his unpredictable actions. Here's a key part of that poll as well. And I want you to think about this. It's unprecedented. The same amount of people in Japan now trust China the same as they would trust the United States. It's equal. China, which of course has a long-standing hostile relationship with Japan, is now viewed by the Japanese people equally to the United States. Basically, 47% choosing the United States and 48% saying Japan's ties with the two should be kept at the same level. Now, you'll also recall that China recently held a summit with Japan and South Korea, something that would otherwise be unprecedented, and a direct middle finger to the United States. Because under former President Biden, he held a meeting with Japan and South Korea and had a trilateral negotiation strengthening our trade relationships with Japan, and South Korea as a check against China's growth. Donald Trump destroyed that. Donald Trump destroyed the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was negotiated by former President Obama and his chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, at the time. I need to reiterate, this is what's because these links are not getting reported elsewhere. By the way, remember, what was it? More than 45 days ago, the White House claimed they were very close on a Japan trade deal. And again, our media just went with it. They just report these things blindly. So let me show you a few data points as well. This is Prime Minister Ashiba. Here he is right after Donald Trump declared his trade war against the world. And Prime Minister Ashiba says it in a diplomatic way. We're the largest foreign employer of Americans. Why are you doing this? That's how this started. Play this clip.
I expressed to the president that Japan has been the world's largest investor in the United States for 5 consecutive years, while also expressing strong concerns that American tariff measures are diminishing the investment capacity of Japanese companies. Based on today's exchanges between the leaders, both sides have appointed responsible ministers to continue discussions. Our country will strongly request a review of the measures from the United States through these talks.
So that's how it started. And then, of course, it progressed with this powerful speech that we played on the MeidasTouch network. And then it went crazy viral after we played it internationally. But we played it here on the MeidasTouch network first, where someone from the opposition party said, Prime Minister Ashiba, you can't do a deal with an extortionist like Donald Trump. Ashiba's worried that his government's going to fall to this opposition party, which wants to take on a stronger stance against Trump. And now we've seen across the world, right? You're making these connections right now, right? In Canada, in Australia, in Romania, in Poland. If you're weak against Trump, you get toppled. If you're complicit in Trump, you get toppled. If you stand up to Trump, if you're pro-EU, pro-democracy, pro-Ukraine, anti-Putin, you're winning right now because people recognize the threat. This was the opposition representative. Play this clip.
What the United States is saying is completely unreasonable. The logic is all over the place and there's no consistency. However, when Japan negotiates regarding what they're saying, well, to put it clearly, it's close to extortion by juvenile delinquents. If Japan gives in and follows their unreasonable demand, saying it's negotiation or a deal, it will set a bad precedent and create a negative example. If the extorter gains money once, it's certain that they will extort again. The formula itself is a complete mess. I wasn't great at math, but if that showed up in a math exam, it would definitely score 0. That's why although Minister Akazawa is serious and capable, there is also concern about whether a serious person can handle it. Since they are not reasonable, they won't listen to reasonable things. Although I said every option, you absolutely must not provide information to an unreasonable opponent. If you get concessions that way, it will set a bad example. Anyway, please do not give in to the extortion from the US, though it's really bad to say it, but this is extortion. If we listen to this, it will really become a bad example.
So then I spoke with the former ambassador to Japan under the Obama administration, Ambassador Rahm Emanuel, because I got to go to the source. I got to speak to people who have done these deals, and I got to show you what they're saying. Play this clip.
First, Japan's the #1 foreign direct investor in the United States for the last 4 years consecutively. Over a million Americans work for Japanese companies, and nearly half of their investment goes to manufacturing. So it's a kind of, we're going to kind of be penny wise and dollar foolish here. Second, Japan hosts the largest military footprint the United States has anywhere in the world. It's the only country that has a permanent aircraft carrier. It is the long pole in our deterrence against China in the Indo-Pacific. And so, nothing stays just in the economic lane. It's a relationship. So that means national security, diplomatic support, it means political support, and it means economic support and integration. Second, imagine this. When the United States wants to put further sanctions on China as it relates to export controls for high tech, the only way it's successful is Japan, Korea, Taiwan, the Dutch stand shoulder to shoulder with the United States. They're going to think real hard about whether we should stand with the United States or allow our companies to continue to export to China. So, relationships don't just have one lane. It's a series of things. You weigh equities against each other. So I think this is very short-sighted in this approach. There's a way you could have approached, as we did in years past, both when I worked for President Clinton, we did the 5 pillars on trade, etc. Japan now is the number one, as I said, number one foreign investor in the United States. Nearly 1 million Americans work for them. And of those, half are in the manufacturing industrial space.
So you tie that all together, and I think you have a strong sense now of the geopolitical situation as it relates to Japan. I did a video this weekend about India. India's pissed because it doesn't have a trade deal with Trump, and Trump's lying and basically acting like India could be bought off for nothing. India's pissed that Trump is claiming that he brokered the ceasefire between India and Pakistan, and India's like, what the hell are you talking about? You didn't have anything to do with it. We did it based on our strength, not because of you, Donald. And you can't dangle trade in our faces and think that we're going to just beg you. Like, who do you think we are? Do you realize how disrespectful that is? And it is. We all know, whether it's Japan, whether it's India, whether it's Latin America, whether it's Canada, whether it's Europe, Donald Trump approaches these countries from disrespect, dishonor, threats to their sovereignty. That's how Trump treats them, and they're feeling it that way. Maybe our American media is trying to normalize this. It ain't being normalized in the rest of the world. America's very weak right. I can't reiterate it enough. People are pulling their money out of the United States internationally. And China is feasting off of this. They held a meeting last week with Latin American and Caribbean countries, projecting itself as the stabilizing force relative to Trump's chaos. That's what's happening. So now that you're educated, share this with people. Let people know. Subscribe here to the MeidasTouch Network. Thanks for watching, and let's get to 5 million.
Can't get enough Meidas? Check out the Meidas Plus Substack for ad-free articles, reports, podcasts, daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, and more. Sign up for free now at MeidasPlus.com.